Well, good morning, everyone. Glad that you are here, and I would like to thank those who are streaming this online as well. We do have a handout this morning really quick. Does anyone not have the handout? Okay, if you don't, Katie has been handing them out in the back. If you're watching online, Stacy has a link to the handout. You can download it and print it out to have it where you are. And if you miss that, it'll be available as well. And so I want to make sure that you get those, because we're going to be going over that handout this morning. And we'll be hitting some of the prayer requests at the end of class, as we started a couple of weeks ago. DJ Rundle is going to be giving us our opening prayer this morning, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Lord, for this day. Thank you, Lord, for all those who have been able to travel here and all those who are watching from home. And any who are abroad, please watch over all those who are traveling and keep them safe so that they may return. And please allow your love to shine through our lives so that others may come to know you through our actions. And I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you, DJ. All right. I want to go over a couple of more things as far as the intro, and then we're going to get into the first chapter this morning as well. But there are some facts about Joshua that are really interesting. We started talking a little bit last week about his background, where he was first introduced, where we were first introduced to him. Of course, he's someone that really kind of came through the ranks under the directorship of Moses, being over the people. And Moses trusted him enough that he put him over the military. And so he really he was maturing, he was growing, and which really helped them out when you have someone like that. I want to look at the purpose of the book this morning. Also, we're going to look at lessons from Joshua, and also how it's divided, because that'll help us, I think, as we get into, start reading into chapter 1 and beyond. It'll help us kind of break this down, so we get a firm understanding as well. Purpose of the book, when you look at Joshua, there's a couple of different things that are really fleshed out in the book of Joshua. Number one is to show God's faithfulness. This is one of the biggest things that God really stressed to the Israelite nation. I mean, you think of just everything that they went through, and God, think of all these people before as well. They were, a lot of them were coming up under the Egyptian religions. They would, and all they saw day in and day out was this paganism, these polytheistic gods, and they had a god for everything. But they were they saw the Egyptian religion just all the time. They were surrounded by it, and so something had to propel them, not just to move forward. When Moses got them out of bondage, it wasn't just them being able to escape this; it was them starting to gain that relationship with God. I mean, you think of how long they were under this, under this slavery, this bondage to Egypt. And so Moses was preparing them. He was he was helping them gain that relationship with God. And of course, later on he would give the law and bring that down to them. But it was really important for these people to gain or regain that understanding that God was going to be with them, and that God was faithful to them. And we're able to see God's faithfulness throughout this entire thing. And there were conditions, of course, weren't there? He says, if you follow me, then you will be blessed. And this goes all the way back to Abraham. Another purpose of the book was to demonstrate the immutability of his word. What does that mean? What is immutability? Can't change. Was that important for them? I mean, you think of just, what people go through. I mean, we have so many constants in this world, and they had it back then as well, that are inconsistencies, rather, where, things just constantly change. Cultures, do they stay the same? Usually get worse. Cultures don't stay the same, do they? They change from generation to generation almost. And we know just in our lifetimes how many times culture has probably changed, how many different things, as far as style is concerned, that changes. Music changes. Everything changes, doesn't it? But how, so with all of this going on, the one constant that we can rely on is that God is not going to change his word. And we can know that his word, when this was first given, is as stable today as it was the day that it was given. And that is so important for us to know, because while all these things start changing around us, we're still going to be saved the same. God's going to still have the same expectations. It's going to be different circumstances, but it's never going to change. This book that we have, that we're able to read about the life of Joshua and all these other great people in the Old Testament and all the lives in the New Testament, that the principles are never going to cease. And so when we look at Joshua, it's to demonstrate the immutability or the unchanging of his word, which would have been very important to them, especially as they came out of this Egyptian slavery. Another one was to show the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham and his seed. And so there are different, there's several different layers to the book of Joshua when we look at it. It's just, this covers a lot of territory with looking at God and the way that God operates. Joshua is going to, as we're going to be reading, was expected to do something, but this really covers a great variety of things of how God was active in their lives as well. But it's to show the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham and his seed. And that's where we really start to see that come to fruition. Look at, who wants to read Joshua chapter 21? I have it on the paper right there. Joshua 21, verse 43 through 45. And this is big right here because, I'll tell you in just a minute after someone reads it.
The land was promised and was fulfilled, not an earthly kingdom that will be set up.
Okay, keep going. Verse 43 through 45, Chris.
Joshua wholly kept the, I don't know if I'm reading right.
Are you in Joshua chapter 21?
I gotta go to it.
Okay,
You said you had it written down here. I'm sorry.
that's all right.
So the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which he had sworn to give their fathers, and they took possession of it and dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around according to all that he had sworn to their fathers. And not a man of all their enemies stood against them. The Lord delivered all of their enemies onto their hand. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All came to pass.
Okay, let's look at that last verse right there first, and then we'll backtrack to verse 43. Verse 45, as we've said, this covers really the whole purpose of the book. Not a word failed of any good thing which the Lord had spoken to the house of Israel. All, and there's the key right here, all came to pass. Meaning that, we know that God gave promises. We know that God said he was going to be with them, right? And there was nothing that God said he would do that did not, that he didn't do.
Does this mean in the book of Joshua everything happened, or everything that was promised where did the promises start? Because obviously the seed didn't come. So which promise?
No, the seed started building up and building up. But remember, he promised he started promising the land and everything to them, and that's where we're going to back up to verse 43 right here. Everything, because everything in the Old Testament, by the way, kind of going along with what David is mentioning right here. Was the seed set up at that time? What does he mean when he talks about the seed promise? Because there were different promises that God did make. He made a land promise. He made a seed promise. What was the seed promise?
One would come.
Keep going. What was it? I heard something. Okay. What was he talking about right there? That was the people. Okay, that's it. His church. He's like, there's a prophecy that was being made by God that, and he said, he says, I will multiply you beyond, more than the stars in the sky, more than the sands of the sea, just, And he's talking about, and this is a spiritual promise right there. But not only did he make the spiritual promise, the seed promise, he also made the land promise. And we see in verse 43 right here, now the Lord gave to Israel all the land of which he had sworn to give to their fathers. And that goes back beyond, before Joshua, to answer David's question. This goes all the way back to, to Moses, and God saying, I'm going to give you this land. You're going to, you'll go in and you'll take it. And just as God promised to do it, he says, if you go into there, he says he had sworn to give to their fathers, and they took possession of it. They dwelt in it. The Lord gave them rest all around, according to all that he had sworn to their father. What does he mean by that? We see that a couple of times when he talks about that he swore to give, to their fathers. Who are their fathers? Say that again? Abraham. The people who came before him, right? And so he made that promise then. But remember, God, does he work on our time frame all the time? No. But he did promise that it would come, and they're starting to see the fulfillment of all of this. And so the Lord gave them the rest all around, according to all that he had given to their fathers. Not a man of all their enemies stood against them, and the Lord delivered all their enemies into their hand. And so as we see in Joshua chapter 21, and we see, when you look at number 3 on the paper right here, to show the fulfillment of his promise to Abraham, the land was promised and it was fulfilled, wasn't it? Why is that so big? There is a belief today, the premillennial belief, that the land has yet to be given. They believe that, that God, as soon as and this really plays big into why a lot of people don't believe the U.S. should ever stand against Israel, because anyone who stands against Israel, and then my mom is one of them. With the religion that I came up when I was young and grew up with, we were taught that that Israel is the place of God, and anyone who stands against Israel is going to be destroyed. It's a premillennial thought. It's a premillennial teaching, because they say, well, when that land finally, when that land is finally given back, that's when Jesus is going to come again. And they believe all these futuristic prophecies, and they're going to be waiting a long time. You know why? Because it was already given to them way back. It wasn't a promise that it was, for some futuristic thousands of years ahead of us. That's the problem, I think, sometimes, is that people, when they read the Bible, and they read, about prophecies, and, it's almost like they start it, like the Bible was written last week. You ever notice that? It's like the Bible was given to us last week, and it talks about these futuristic prophecies, and it's like, okay, well, it's going to be in our lifetime then. Because we always like to because we like to be the center of attention sometimes, don't we? We like to be the fulfillment, and people get so into the fantasy of prophecy fulfillment, thinking we're going to be the ones that fulfill this prophecy in our lifetime, that they just, that they disregard a lot of what's already been given to us. When you look at Joshua chapter 21 and going backwards and looking at the promise of the land, we see how it's fulfilled in Joshua, that the land was given to them and it would be dispersed among these different people. Okay? The earthly, and the kingdom, a lot of times, when we read about it, like with Daniel, is it an earthly kingdom that Daniel's talking about right there? No. What kind of a kingdom is it? What does he say? It's a kingdom that's never going to be destroyed. Well, what's the only, kingdoms come and go, don't they? Dynasties come and go. Think of the most powerful dynasties that have ever been in the world. And they have, they all come to an end. Someone bigger and someone tougher, someone more stabilized, stronger comes in and they defeat them. Then they become then they become the new world superpower. And then they go. And the next one comes in. But what's a kingdom that could never be destroyed?
Daniel was promising an immutable kingdom.
That's exactly it. An unchanging kingdom. There's only one kingdom, isn't that will never be destroyed. What is it?
Kingdom of God.
That's it. How do you defeat something that's ruled and governed by God, that's set up by Christ, and that was going to wipe everything out? So we see this land promise that would be given back to Israel, and it happened exactly the way that they said it would be done. And that's why Joshua is so important, because it really does help us understand and face false teachings today, where people are saying we're still waiting for this land to be set up. We can tell them, we can go back, refer back to Joshua and say, it already was set up. This land, it already was given back to them, just as God promised it would happen. And so we're able to see the fulfillment of all of these different things. And so this was the purpose of the book, was to show how God fulfilled all these promises to them, how he was faithful to them, and how his word was going to be unchanging. And that was critical, especially thinking about what Joshua was about to take on. When he goes into Canaan, he relied, all of those people relied on God being with them, because they couldn't do it by themselves, could they? Canaan was not a weak place. None of the campaigns that would be going on, that we'll be reading about, these were not a weak people in Canaan. Many of them are they'd been warring, or they'd been trained for combat, and to go in like they did, they had to have help. And how amazing it was when you start looking at what God was about to do for them. There's a lot of lessons that we can learn from Joshua. Number one, Joshua, just like he had always done, Joshua wholly kept the word of God. And that's a lesson that we can learn today, isn't it? How great it is that we can look back at men like this and see how God dealt with them, and how they were able to keep the word of God. Is it always easy to keep it? I mean, you look at, what are some of the hindrances that we have? What can keep us from following God wholly? Entirely. Ourselves? Go, expand on that, Stacy. Okay. We're self-centered people sometimes, aren't we? Just, what pleases me right now? And we're impulsive.
We want to be the center of prophecy.
Okay, we want to be the center of prophecy. Everybody think, they want to think that they're it. What else? Families. Families are a big part of it, isn't it? I mean, if we have families that are not faithful, or want to, who don't like it, it's sad sometimes. I've known couples where, one is faithful and the other one, she was really faithful. She came all the time and tried to bring her daughter, who was very young at the time, and her husband wasn't, and he wanted nothing to do with the church and wanted her to have nothing to do with the church or their daughter. And he said on a number of occasions, I don't want you going there. He said, I'm the head of this house, and I don't want you affiliating yourself with the church. I don't want you bringing our daughter into this kind of a crazy religious environment, and wanted absolutely nothing. What do you think it did to her? It's sad when you see things like that, because it really can, it hammers their mental health, it hammers their spiritual health to just, go through stuff like that. And to talk to her was just, she was depressed because of this, because she knew where she should have been. And she knew where she wanted her daughter to be. But, families can have it. And then, so we see that from all sides. Anything else?
I was just going to say, I was in that position whenever I became a Christian. And the determination that you have to stay with to go through that is very, very difficult.
It really can be. That's why it's so important to really reach out to our church family, isn't it? And our church family can sometimes be a stronger support system than even our home. That's one of the reasons why, next week I'll be starting a series on Sunday mornings, worship hour on, building up a godly home and things that we can do and the ways that we can encourage one another, because it's not everyone has a happy home. Not everyone has a godly home, but there are things that we can, ways that we can encourage people and to, really try to maintain a rooted, grounded effort in this. Dave?
Ironically, that's one of the ways I think we can fulfill prophecy. Paul taught that the gospel is foolishness to people who aren't being saved. So how would you expect someone who saw this as foolishness to behave? But to people who are being saved, it's everything.
It's exactly it. We can, we can definitely follow commands and, we can reason through Scripture. It is. It's not going to mean much to people who already are disinterested. We need to wholly follow and trust the Lord. And we're able to look at men like Joshua and many of the people that were with him in doing this and see the great, the great trials that they went through and how did they handle them. Because we might not be, we're not going to be going into a land like he did, but we're going to be facing our trials, aren't we? And there are things that are going to stand opposed to us. There are things that we are going to have to deal with, and there are going to be tough situations, and it can be any number of different things. But we know that if we do follow and trust the Lord, that we really can get through any circumstance. We can get through it. Does it mean we're going to get over it? There are some things we don't get over, aren't there? There are some things that just, it's tough that we can't get over certain things. But we can get through them. And that's why we need to rely on our church family. We need to rely on God and trust that God is walking that path with us. And he understands. He understood every hardship that Joshua and these people went through. He understood. Remember when we read last week how, and we looked at a couple weeks ago as well in the lesson, that God saw just how devastated his people were. Just how downtrodden they were. They're emotionally, they were just beaten down. And God said, I see my people, and I see what they're going through. And it hasn't stopped. We can expect the same kind of treatment today from God as they did. He saw their hardships. He saw what they were going through. And he sees what we're going through, doesn't he? He knows every detail of our lives. He knows it better than we do. And he knows when we're hurt. He knows when we have pain. And he knows that when we're frustrated and angry and have all these different mixed emotions about different things happening. And we can know that it's the same God dealing with us today and that sees us as Joshua saw and those Israelites saw. Because he doesn't change. And his word doesn't change. And his faithfulness doesn't change either. Joshua completely surrendered to the Lord. That's the only way to do it. I can try to, like Stacy said, I can try to do things myself, or I can make myself at the center of everything, thinking I can control it. You ever been guilty of that? Just saying, I'm going to try to control the situation. Because we are creatures, I think, sometimes that we want to fix things ourselves, don't we? I always want to fix things. And I have to take a step back and realize that I can't fix everything. And I think all of us have probably been there. To the point that we can't, that we're not going to, unless we surrender to the Lord, we're not going to get through some things. But if we can surrender to him, Joshua showed that he surrendered to him. Even Joshua, who's at he's the head of this Israelite nation going into Canaan, had a lot of power, had a lot of influence, and yet he realized there's someone above him. And that's what we need to do. Stop trying to control situations yourself and start giving them to God. Now, does that mean we don't have to do anything? And I can just sit back and say, God, why don't you just take care of everything? It'd be nice sometimes, if we have bills we can't pay or we've hit financial hardships. Lord, please just take care of all my bills. Well, what good would that, what lesson would that teach us anyway? Some people say, well, I wish God would just find me a mate. Well, I've heard, I've heard people talk, pray about finding someone. When we try to do it, we sometimes come up short, don't we? I know what I want. God knows what I need. But when you can give it to God and trust him, how amazing things are and how they can turn out. Joshua was also a man that was prepared. Think about this. He was such a great leader, but we are not ready to lead until we're prepared. We're not ready to make decisions the right way until we're prepared. And that that doesn't always come overnight, does it? I mean, you think of different things that we prepare for in this life. I mean, we have things that come up that we prepare to do. We have someone sitting in the back row that's preparing for marriage. There are things to do and get ready for, and things that because you start looking forward to it. And all of us that have been there know that we prepared for marriage, don't we? We know that at some point it's going to come a time when now all of a sudden it's not just my decision, it's our decision. It's not just my way, it's our way. And I know that there are certain things that didn't bother me. When I had a roommate living down in Burbank, I was living with a good friend of mine, and he also happened to be a good friend of Katie's. And it was great having that roommate because he thought the same way that I did, which means if I left, plates out from dinner the previous night, we're not going to care. That's if we even had glass plates. I think most of our shopping was paper plates and paper cups anyway, because it was easy just to throw away. Then we just go and, But then when you get into that house with someone, they're looking at Katie like, did you straighten him out with him? Yes, you did, although sometimes I still forget, so. But it becomes our decision. There are things that we prepare for in different periods of our lives. When we take on a new job, when we go to school, parenthood. I mean, who's ready for, to be a parent until you become a parent? But you try to prepare for that by talking to other people and watch how other people with their children. And then we get even higher than that, and we start preparing for when we leave this world, don't we? Do we know when it's going to happen? No. But can we prepare for it so when it does happen? Absolutely. We need to. And so there are different times when we're prepared. That's what Joshua, he was a man that was prepared. And we're not ready to do anything in our lives until we are prepared, or to make the right decisions in our lives unless we're prepared for them. And how much easier is that when we can come to a situation and we have prepared it and we've gone through all of these, some things we just can't do because we don't know. But there are some things that we can. So when we make that decision, I can already decide, I know what I'm going to do. We prepare young people, don't we? They're going to hit situations that are going to be very challenging to them and that can really damage them if they're not prepared for it. What happens when a young person comes into a group and there are things going on in that group that they are doing or saying or watching, and a young person, if they're prepared for that, because we're doing our jobs the right way, then they're going to be prepared for that. And they're going to make that decision, and it's going to be really easy for them. You think of preparation. Even the Lord spent time preparing. He prepared, and he's God manifested. What age did he start preaching to people?
About 30 years
30 years
old.
old. Well, what did he do before that?
Disinfect.
A lot of speculation to that, right? We looked at this last week. When did we see God? When did we see Christ on this earth? Well, we saw him at birth, saw him at 12 years old, and when he was talking to the teachers. After that, when did we see him? 30 years old. So there was a gap of a lot of years, but when he came on the scene, he was ready, right? He knew when he wanted to come on the scene. exactly when he was ready to do it. And even then, he would prepare himself. He'd go into different places by himself, and he would talk to the Father, the first part of the Godhead. He would prepare himself as the Savior. And if he did it, how important do you think it is for us to do it? Joshua prepared himself for going in. He had a lot of time to think about it. How long did he spend in the wilderness to prepare? Anyone know? How long were they in the wilderness? 40 years. 40 years getting ready and thinking about that. And how, and it must have been difficult, I imagine. Because when the spies were sent, and remember Joshua was one of the spies along with Caleb and 10 others, and they come back and God said, okay, they were gone how long? 40 days. And God said, for every day that you were gone because you did not believe in me, or those 10 spies didn't believe that God could really help them, he said it's going to be 1 year for every one of those. And so that makes it 40 years. Isn't that amazing? When they got to the end of this, think about what Moses must have felt like and Joshua must have felt like. When they finally get to that point where they can see Canaan and it's right there in front of them, and Moses is looking over from that mountain and he knows that it's right there for the taking. He knows he's not going to go in, and so he anoints Joshua, and Joshua gets ready to lead them into there. Can you imagine what they must have been thinking? That, you know what, we could have taken care of this a long time ago had we had faith in God. If we trusted in God, I mean, we could have just, we could have wiped away the last 40 years of this. How, do we do that?
So they're just like me then.
Hindsight's always,
Yeah. It's like I read the Bible and I say, man, if I just would have had the faith to believe that just 30 years ago, my trajectory would have been way different.
you ever do that? Anybody else? Read something, learn something, and think, wow, if I could have learned this, way back when I was in college or when I was a teenager, it would have been, but we learn, don't we? And that's what Joshua did. He learned. And Moses learned, and the Israelites learned. 40 years that they spent. So the book of Joshua is divided into 3 parts. We have from Joshua chapter 1 through 12, we have the conquering of the land. This is where they actually go in, and that's what we're going to be getting into starting in just a minute here. From Joshua 13 through 22, we have a division of the land. And so he spends some time, dividing it. Once they take it, they start dividing it among these different families. And then finally in Joshua, the last couple of chapters right here is the farewell address. And there are some huge lessons when we get to the end of this book to be had. When you look at 1 Chronicles chapter 7, I'm not going to look at that, but you have that in front of you. There's a genealogy of Joshua that you can look at to just see who his ancestors were. And what I want to do is encourage you, when you look at that genealogy, look at all those names. Do a search on those names to find out what kind of a lineage Joshua had. Because it really is fascinating. We sometimes judge people by their lineage, don't we? Well, who are their parents? What did their father do? We always ask that. What did their father do? What did their grandfather do? And then we hear people say things like, well, they come from good stock. What does that mean? They come from good pedigree. That word's not just for dogs. It means that they know that their family is strong in a certain way with certain things. And so look at where Joshua came from. It's interesting to read a lot about these genealogies with these people, because we do gain a lot from it. All right. So when you look at Joshua, book of Joshua begins right where Deuteronomy ends. One leads right into the next one. It doesn't always happen that way when we read different books of the Bible, does it? Now, some talk about the same events. When you get to the minor prophets and the major prophets, they're writing about the same thing, about the Babylonian captivity. But it doesn't always flow one right into the next. And so where Deuteronomy, and that's why it does you good to read Deuteronomy, get to know about Moses, and then at the end of that, it will slide right into it. Look at Deuteronomy 34. It's probably on the same page as chapter 1 of Joshua. If not, it's probably just a page or two before that. Deuteronomy 34, verse 8 through 12. We see the end of Moses right here. God's already promised it. Moses is on his last legs right here. It says he has passed away. Children of Moses, or children of Israel rather, wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. And so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. And now Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. And so the children of Israel heeded him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So they trusted Moses, and Moses, remember, he stands him up in front of the people and said, this is who's going to be your leader. This is the one who you need to be listening to right now. And so it says the people heeded Joshua because they heeded Moses. And he did as the Lord commanded Moses. But since then, there has not arisen in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, in all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, before Pharaoh, before all of his servants, and in all his land, and by all that mighty power and all the great terror which Moses performed in the sight of all Israel. How big was it to fill the shoes of someone like Moses? How intense that must have been. You know, Joshua was ready. He'd been preparing for this. But you think it was easy? You know, it's interesting when you start looking at leadership. There are elders that come and they go, and there are new elders that are installed, and is it easy? And we have elders here. We just installed a new one this last year. Think it's easy for him? No. There's a learning curve with leadership, isn't there? There are decisions that need to be made, and they need to get used to making certain decisions. They need to get used to, and that's hard for someone who's stepping into that, because think of for years or for a long time, someone could be under that leadership, right? And all of a sudden they step up to that position, and they're so used to being under that leadership that they sometimes will doubt themselves, they second guess themselves, and now they're in the position to start making decisions with the eldership. It's an eldership. It's not, we don't have one elder, we know that. There's not an alpha elder. There's elders with experience, and you can certainly rely and lean on those elders for experience. And I think that's a great thing when that happens, because they can kind of mentor them into that position. But it can be a tough thing when you step into leadership. Think of what Joshua went through when he stepped into that role. I mean, you look at work, same thing. You're promoted to being a manager. All of a sudden, you're making decisions that you didn't make before. You're over people. You're having to discipline people. You're having to encourage people and build them up. And it's, it can be, but it's worth it when you see a great spiritual leader being built up like this. And Joshua was about to find out what that was like.
I had a technical question back there in 34.
Okay.
It says, since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses. So that means the guy who wrote this said, since that time, there's been no one like Moses. So obviously it wasn't, say, one of the apostles writing this, because they saw the Lord face to face. But so when was this?
Moses, well, okay, that's a good point. We can hang on that for just a moment. Who wrote Deuteronomy? Who's credited with it? Moses. Okay, did Moses write about things in his life?
Not after his death, though.
Did he write about things that were outside of his timeline? How did Moses know about the history about how the earth began? How did he know that? Because Moses wrote Genesis as well, right? How did Moses know everything there was that happened in that first week? Who told him? There'd only be one person, one who told him, right? Who gave him that knowledge. And if he had knowledge going that way, don't you think that he could have knowledge going the other way and know about his own, about his own death? God revealed everything to him. We need to be careful sometimes, because there are people there is There are groups out there who doubt authorship, and they say, no, this had to be written, way longer, and it really throws a kink into.
I guess I wanted to put in there, when we get to Joshua 5, I'm going to be asking this question again.
Do it.
Because that's exactly why I'm asking it now. So he wrote outside of his timeline, and I'm trying to figure out, because the Lord obviously spoke to someone face to face in my mind whenever we get to Joshua 5. So that's the reason I'm asking.
Okay. Nope, we'll look at that when we get to it. Joshua 5 is right before they get into with Jericho, and while they're setting up outside of the Gilgal. Anyway, we did not get into chapter 1. We're going to we'll start on that next week, but now we have everything set for when they actually go into there. I'll read, you know what? I've only got 2 prayer requests. Read Joshua 1:1 and 2. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant, is dead. And now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. In fact, and when you look at God's charge to Joshua right here, verse 1 through 9 is going to be the charge that God gives to Moses, or to Joshua, excuse me. And that's what we're going to be really focusing on next week and probably the week after, is looking at this charge that he gave to him. God was saying, now you're ready to go. Moses is gone. You've been preparing all this time. Now it's ready for you to step up. Now these people need you. And that's where we'll hit next week.